Ralph Nader, consumer and political activist. Now, he first made headlines back in 1965 when he published a now famous book called Unsafe at Any Speed. That study exposed safety problems and poor engineering in the American auto industry, and it sparked an investigation. It pissed off the car companies. General Motors actually hired private detectives to try and discredit him. They tried to plant stories, even questioned his sexuality. Now, when Nader found out, he sued and he won. General Motors apologized.
To the extent that General Motors bears responsibility, I want to apologize here and now to the members of this subcommittee and Mr. Nader.
And because of Ralph's expose, a series of landmark laws were introduced making cars safer. For example, the seatbelt, Ralph Nader. That was just the beginning of Ralph's work, though. Since then, he's tackled a long list of issues: congressional reform, nuclear power safety, air and water pollution. Hey, safe drinking water? Hello, Ralph Nader. Overall, he's been responsible for helping pass at least 8 major consumer protection laws in America. And Ralph Nader's passion for the people extends to another world: running for president. He's done it 3 times: 1996, 2000, and 2004. By the way, in 2000, he was a major player. 3 million Americans voted for him. It's about 2.7% of the vote. In fact, many people believe that Nader took enough votes away from the Democrats, and they accuse him of putting this feller in the White House. All right, there he goes. Life in a nutshell. And here is the man, Mr. Ralph Nader. Nice to see you. All right. You got this book called The 17 Traditions, and it's interesting because it's a side of you that most people don't get to see. Your very personal side. You're talking about your childhood. You talk about your family. You know, with Mother's Day coming up on Sunday, you lost your mother over a year ago, about 15 months ago. I wondered how big an impact that had on your decision to do this.
It was a love story for my mother and father, but I think also it resonates with a lot of parents and grandparents who say, gee, you know, we had all kinds of things in our background: wisdom, insight, experience. Why don't we put it down? Mm-hmm. Video, audio, handwritten. Families got to be much more self-conscious of their best traditions. You know, they have their squabbles and fights, and they all remember the low points. But it's the high points that are transmitted on to the next generation and the next generation. And that they've met the test of experience.
What are some of the traditions that you're talking about, some of those things?
Well, they're ones that mothers and fathers have to deal with. How do you get the child to eat right, not to fall in with the wrong crowd, do their chores, complete their studies, respect their parents? So the book started out with the first tradition is the most unlikely. It's learning how to listen. My mother would say, if you talk all the time, you're not going to learn anything. Mm-hmm. And so when you learn to listen, you listen, you learn.
You got 2 ears and 1 mouth, man.
Yeah,
so.
And then not only that, but it calmed us down. We wouldn't fidget when they took us to town meetings or courtrooms or whatnot. Our observation powers improved because we weren't, you know, the world didn't revolve around us. And so that's the first tradition. And it goes into the conversations at the family dinner table. No TV at that time to interrupt it. And then it goes into traditions of sibling equality. They never preferred one child over another for the obvious reason that it could scar the disfavored child for life. We'd even bait them and try to get them, you know, to prefer one. They would never fall for it.
She loves me more. No. But why'd you write this book then? Do you think that, do we need this kind of book? Are we not going down that road anymore?
Yeah, well, the family's under huge attack. I mean, the direct commercial marketing to kids, junk food, junk drink, violent programming, you name it. Mm-hmm. That's one. Then there's the economic pressures. They spend less time with adults, kids today, including their own parents, longer commutes back and forth, trying to make ends meet. And to top it off, the kids now are spending 50 hours a week watching screens. They're in virtual reality, the internet, the TV, the video games. They need this more than ever, the traditions handed down.
Do you think that, you alluded to this in the book, the idea that we are not raising political children anymore?
Well, there's a tradition of civics. I mean, you know, people say, hey, how'd you turn out this way? My mother got this question so often back in the 60s after I took on General Motors and became fairly well known. By the way, I had to come to Canada to get on TV in Toronto, beamed through Windsor to Detroit, because no TV would cover any criticism of cars by make and model. So hats off to Canada on that one. By the way, George, that's what led me to write this book, Canada First. Actually, I came out with a book on all the areas that Canada was first in the early 90s.
Yeah.
I couldn't get a publisher in Canada because the Canadian publishers say, Canadians aren't interested where they're first. They're too modest.
We don't like to brag about it. We're
That's why I wrote the book, right? You wouldn't have that trouble in Texas, right?
No, that's true.
So,
well, there are parts of Canada that'll be fine with that.
Calgary, you mean?
I'm not saying that. You said that. I like Calgary. That was him.
Anyway, now I know you have a national show.
Yes, we absolutely.
So anyway, there's a tradition of civics and tradition of business. My father had a sprawling restaurant on Main Street opposite the textile factories in a little town northwest Connecticut. And they used to say for a nickel you had a cup of coffee in Nader's restaurant, 10 minutes of politics. So it was that kind of, but my parents never made a distinction between family values, getting involved in civic improvement values, and business values. That's very important. To point out, it was all of a seamless web. Anyway, I was saying, a reporter from Parade calls up, and this is in the 60s. He said, I'm writing an article on Ralph, Mrs. Nader, and I want to know, what makes Ralph tick? And she says, what makes you not tick? In other words, what's the big deal about trying to improve your society and your country? Why is that freakish? But sitting home doing nothing, you know, and apathy. By the way, you know what the meaning in ancient Greece of idiot, don't you?
Yeah, well,
it was being apathetic.
Yeah, I've been called it a lot.
In ancient Greece, if you didn't care about your city, you freeloaded on other people, you were called an idiot.
And a lot of people think that they would prefer it that way. You know, the less you know, the less you get involved, the easier one's life is.
Yeah, but you know what happens to the society when not enough people pick up their oars.
Yeah,
that's true.
We go down. Is what ends up happening to us.
There's a tradition of discipline. Here's how they didn't believe in corporal punishment, my mother and dad. Not only did it hurt the child, but they thought it was a reflection on their own failure. So they would discipline us with proverbs. And Arabic was very, very rich in proverbs. They just float the proverb right there, you know, to calm us down. And if that didn't work, we stood in the corner next to the sewing machine looking at the wall until we contemplated our corrective behavior. Nice.
My mother used to take away my hockey stick. And I was not allowed to go and play hockey. And that was my punishment. When you write a book like this, though, do you have to be conscious of, you don't want to be the guy that writes the book that goes, oh, back in my day, everything was better. And then you sound like that old dude who doesn't like today.
Yeah.
Did you have to be aware of that?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, every generation has its stresses and pressures, right? They say, oh, look at today, things go so fast, technology, sprawl, you know, kids are alone a lot. Yeah, but it wasn't a cakewalk to raise kids during the Great Depression in the 30s, World War II, you know. That's where I learned recycling, only they called it thrift. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, he would say, you got to, you know, food was rationed, fuel was rationed in World War II. So we learned how to be thrifty. We grew a victory garden. So we learned how to garden. We learned not to throw stuff away that shouldn't be thrown away. We had big balls of twine and aluminum foil.
So you say a lot of these values from those days they're not evident in politics today.